The ship EA's Horizon, ascendant, drifted through the quiet dark between stars like a thought that had escaped the mind of the universe. Inside its reinforced observation deck, Commander Elias Mercer stood alone, watching distant suns bend slightly as the vessel transitioned through its experimental fold drive. Humanity had not just reached the stars, it had learned how to touch them without breaking. Behind him, the bridge was alive with controlled tension. Every officer knew what this moment meant. First contact was no longer theory or hope. It was scheduled reality. For the first time in human history, Earth was not reaching into an empty sky, but into a populated one. Dr. Mira Hale entered quietly, her datapad glowing with streams of linguistic models and predictive translation algorithms. She had spent 10 years preparing for voices she had never heard. Now those voices were waiting on the other side of a signal that had repeated itself across 3 star systems with impossible mathematical precision. She stopped beside Mercer and followed his gaze into the void. "The signal is still stable," she said. "It is not random. It is structured communication. Whoever is out there knows we are coming." Mercer nodded without turning. "That is what worries me." The fleet arrived at the designated coordinates 12 minutes later. What they found was not empty space and not a planet, but something far more deliberate. A massive construct floated in orbit around a pale blue gas giant. Rings of metallic structures rotated with mechanical grace, absorbing and releasing energy like breathing lungs. Ships moved around it in silent formation, each design different enough to suggest multiple civilizations working under a shared system. "This is not first contact," Dr. Hale whispered. "This is membership." A transmission opened without request. It filled every channel, every frequency, every backup system humanity had built in preparation for unknown physics. The voice that followed was calm, layered, and ancient in tone. "Welcome, travelers from Sol designation. You have arrived within the jurisdiction of the Concord of Stellar Nations. Identify your origin and intent." Commander Mercer stepped forward. His voice carried across encrypted translation systems that struggled to keep up with the alien cadence. "We are humanity from Earth. We come in peace and seek contact with other intelligent life." A pause followed. Not silence, but computation. Earth is registered as a developing system. Your arrival was predicted within acceptable deviation. You will proceed to docking protocols for evaluation. Dr. Hale frowned at the phrasing. Evaluation was not a word used between equals. As the fleet moved toward the station, subtle irregularities began to surface. Sensor arrays detected overlapping communication layers beneath the official channel. Multiple species were speaking at once, but only one voice was being presented to the humans. "They are filtering themselves," Hale said quietly. "Someone is controlling what we hear." Mercer watched the station grow larger on the view screens. "Then we will learn what they are trying not to say." What humanity did not know was that across the Concord, their arrival had already been classified. Not as guests, not as equals, but as a variable. And variables in a system built on control were either corrected or eliminated. The docking bay of the Concord station was vast enough to swallow entire human cruisers without strain. When the Horizon Ascendant entered, it was escorted by drones that moved with surgical precision. No aggression was shown, but nothing about the escort suggested trust either. Inside the central chamber, humanity was finally given visual confirmation of what the Concord truly was. 7 species stood in a semicircle. Each was distinct enough to feel alien, in the deepest sense of the word. One appeared insectile, with layered optical structures that shifted constantly. Another resembled a towering aquatic form, sustained in a mobile gravity tank. A third looked almost human, until one noticed the additional joints in its limbs and the absence of any visible emotion. The speaker introduced itself as Virel of the Concord Synod. Its voice was translated perfectly, yet something in its tone suggested the original meaning carried more weight than language could hold. "You are early," it said. "Your species has exceeded expected technological growth rate. This is noted as deviation." Commander Mercer stepped forward with diplomatic restraint. "We prefer to call it progress." A ripple passed through the assembly. Not laughter, but reaction, like pressure changes in a sealed environment. Dr. Hale observed the subtle exchanges between species. Micro-signals, bioluminescent flickers, quantum pulse shifts. They were not individuals. They were synchronized components of a larger system. Virel continued, "The Concord exists to maintain stability across developed systems. Your classification determines your role. Resource contributor, protected civilization, or monitored anomaly." Mercer's expression did not change. "And which are we?" A pause longer than before. "Anomaly." The words settled like a weight. Humanity was escorted to observation quarters. They were not prisons, but they were not free movement either. Every corridor adjusted itself to their presence. Doors opened only where permitted. Paths redirected without explanation. That night, Dr. Hale accessed a restricted interface through a degraded communication loop. What she found changed everything. Hundreds of civilizations were listed, not as members, but as managed systems. Entire worlds labeled for extraction, cultural guidance, or population stabilization. She called Mercer immediately. "This is not a government," she said. "It is a containment structure." Mercer studied the data in silence. When he spoke, his voice was lower. "How many species resist?" Hale hesitated. "None successfully." That was the moment something shifted in the human command structure. Not fear, not hesitation, recognition. Humanity had not been invited into a community. It had been measured for captivity. And somewhere deep within the Concord network, that evaluation had already triggered a response protocol. The first strike did not come as a declaration. It came as a correction. Human escort vessels were disabled outside the station without warning. Energy grids collapsed in precise patterns designed to minimize debris and maximize control. The Concord did not seek destruction. It sought compliance. Commander Mercer stood on a bridge that was suddenly no longer under his command. "They think we will freeze," he said. Dr. Hale monitored failing systems. "They are not attacking us like a military. They are processing us like a system error." The Concord voice returned, unchanged in tone. "Deviation detected. Containment engaged." But humanity had already learned something critical. Every system the Concord used relied on prediction. Every response assumed behavior patterns based on previous civilizations. Humans did not fit those patterns. Mercer activated a buried protocol that had never been tested outside simulations. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a fracture response, a cascading disruption of signal hierarchy. Across human ships, silence turned into autonomy, and autonomy turned into action. The Concord fleet surrounding the station hesitated for the first time in recorded history. Not because they were damaged, but because their coordination network had lost coherence. Dr. Hale watched the data streams fracture. "They cannot synchronize," she said. "We broke their assumption layer," Mercer replied calmly. "Then they will have to fight us without certainty." What followed was not a battle in the traditional sense. It was the collapse of a system that had never imagined resistance that adapted faster than control could stabilize. Human ships did not outgun the Concorde. They outthought it in real time. Every engagement became unpredictable. Every maneuver broke classification models. Every countermeasure forced the Concorde to rebuild understanding mid-conflict. And in that space, humanity did something no managed species had ever done. It expanded. Across the Concorde network, alarms spread. Entire sectors reported the same impossible conclusion. The anomaly was no longer contained. It was replicating strategy faster than suppression protocols could update. On the central station, Virel observed the chaos for the first time without certainty. "What are they doing?" he asked. A subordinate responded with a concept no Concorde species had used in millennia. "They are learning faster than we can correct them." Mercer's final transmission was broadcast across all channels, overriding Concorde encryption through brute adaptive resonance. "We are not a deviation," he said. "We are the consequence of every system that believes control is stability." The Concorde fleet began to withdraw. Not defeated, not destroyed, but recalculating something it had never been forced to consider. That survival might not belong to the most controlled system, but to the most adaptable one. And in the silence that followed, across 1,000 stars, the galaxy registered a new classification for humanity. Not anomaly, not resource, not subject, uncontained variable. And for the first time in recorded galactic history, the Concorde did not know what would happen next.